Good morning, class. So today's lesson is going to be about changes in DNA, and basically we're talking about genetic disorders today and how they come about, what causes genetic disorders to take place in the first place. So a genetic disorder is any illness that is caused by a change in a person's or plant or animal DNA. And we're going to be talking mostly about humans. But you've heard of these catastrophes that happen in other parts of the world. For example, in Chernobyl, there was a meltdown of a nuclear power plant that caused the entire area in Russia to be completely evacuated for many, many years. Radiation has caused a number of health-related issues for the people of Fukushima, in which in 2011, in March of 2011, an earthquake caused a tsunami that basically affected the Pacific coast of Japan. And within this region, this tsunami caused a nuclear power plant to melt down. So basically the cooling pumps failed. There were 3 reactors, which basically all 3 of them suffered core meltdowns. And this meltdown, nuclear power plant meltdown in Fukushima, has been the worst since 1986 Chernobyl meltdown. And the radioactive material from the plant released into the surrounding area, and about 71,000 people that used to live there. Out of 71,000, 60,000 were evacuated. And these are just pictures of what the mutations have caused. So like you can see that that's an eggplant, but it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 different lobes of that one eggplant. And then this is a frog, which has I don't know, it's got 2 extra legs, and I think this turtle over here it's got some weird extra something happening on its shell, some kind of growth. And these are supposed to be tomatoes, but this tomato is like got a whole bunch of little baby tomatoes sprouting off of 1 or 2. So lots of things that are causes lots of changes that have happened to the genetic makeup within the cells of these living organisms have caused these changes. So how do traits come about? So, for example, there were not always people that had blue eyes, and many traits that we see today in humans, for example, the fact that we walk upright, we are quite tall. For example, a lot of us are quite tall. There's so many different traits I can think about, but these things like tallness and erectness have come about over thousands and thousands and thousands of years as a result of changes within the DNA, and those changes that are passed down from generation to generation. So this blue-eyed people basically came about 6,000 years ago. So in fact, every inherited trait had to arrive at some point throughout history, because we all know that we have come from a line of much simpler organisms over millions of years. And those changes to those simpler organisms' DNA have brought about a multitude of different species, okay, with very different physical and behavioral features. There were not always genetic disorders like, for example, cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia. New traits and disorders appear due to changes in the DNA. Oops, sorry. So, although our cells have many different ways to protect that genetic information and make sure that errors don't occur, sometimes things do happen. So while many of these changes have little or no effect, some can be quite devastating. So a genetic disorder can happen when changes take place, and when these changes, for example, can be a change in to a single gene that affects protein production. And this, for example, is when you have any change to a normal sequence of DNA, this is called a mutation, okay? And these changes can be brought about by many different factors, but chemicals and radiation are examples of those factors that can cause a change in a normal sequence of DNA, okay? They can also be brought about by internal factors, so things that are happening within our cells, within the nucleus, and for example, problems with DNA replication. So during that cell division process, during mitosis, for example, when those chromosomes, those single-stranded chromosomes are being duplicated, sometimes they're not duplicated correctly, and that causes a mutation. Mutations are random. So if within a somatic cell, change will not be passed on to offspring. If in a sex cell the mutation takes place, the change will be passed on to offspring. Okay, so there are about 4,000 known diseases or disorders caused by changes within genetic material. And these changes are sometimes very, very minute, or they can be, they can be complete, like they can, remember when we talked about DNA being made up of those nucleotides that have the nitrogenous base, for example, thymine and cytosine and guanine. A genetic disorder can occur if just one nucleotide is changed, but some genetic disorders require that a whole chromosome be affected. Okay, so the diseases and disorders can be caused by many different variety of changes within the genetic material. Mutations are not always harmful. Mutations actually happen all the time, but most of the time they have no effect, thankfully. In fact, they are the basis for evolution, the reason why organisms are the way they are. So you can watch that video within the PowerPoint. But this is a diagram just showing you of what a mutation in over time in giraffes allowed them, this mutation that allowed them to increase their neck length so that they could reach much taller trees, and they're competing with other animals, so they were able to reach the taller trees because of these genetic mutations that allowed them to have longer necks. And that obviously was something that made them able to compete better for the food, and therefore it was a good mutation that allowed them to survive better. So genetic disorders. So 3 ways a genetic disorder can arise. So basically the first way is that there could be a change to a single gene. So this is these are sequences of DNA. So sometimes what happens is a nucleotide basically, or single nucleotide, this DEF, for example, is switched over and it becomes FED, okay? So you're basically changing that sequence of amino acids, and those amino acids code for specific proteins that make us who we are. And if that sequence is changed, then that protein can no longer be produced, and therefore that can either have no bearing on an organism, or it can cause a lot of health problems. So this is just a change to a single gene. Then you have basically another type of problem in which an entire chromosomes are either duplicated or missing. So this is called a trisomy. And a trisomy is when you have the condition in which there are 3 copies of a given chromosome in each somatic cell, rather than the normal number, which is 2. So you get 1 from your mom, 1 from your dad. But in this case, the replication has caused there to be 3, which leads to a number of conditions, and we'll talk about those in a bit. And then there's also multiple changes to one or more genes combined with environmental factors. So you can increase the chances of a mutation happening by being exposed to certain environmental factors. So, for example, cancer. This is just showing the diagram showing you person being exposed to ultraviolet light, which it's a known cancer causing, especially skin cancer causing agent, because it damages the DNA within the skin cells and causes them to, not function properly. So single gene mutations. So remember that one gene codes for one protein. So if a gene is changed, again, the protein will be changed. Each protein in our body carries out specific tasks, either structural or functional. For example, proteins are, they make your enzymes, they make hormones that are so invaluable to our bodies. They are the part of our cellular structure. They allow for certain substances to go into and out of the cell. They represent or they act as markers, special markers on a cell, so a white blood cell, for example, can recognize that particular cell as not foreign, for example. So many different types of tasks that proteins have within our body. So cystic fibrosis is an example of a genetic order that affects the production of a protein that helps salt to move into and out of cells. So what happens with someone who has cystic fibrosis, this mutation causes excess mucus, a lot more mucus production on the outside of cells. And this mucus basically clogs the lungs and affects respiratory function. So they have to have this special breathing apparatus, or basically to get rid of that excess mucus. And they have to do this hours and hours every day. So it's a very time-consuming and difficult thing, and they're not able to, people with cystic fibrosis are not able to breathe as normally as other people that don't have this genetic condition. So you can see that the normal airway is quite clear, the healthy lungs, the airway is nice and pink and free of mucus, and then you've got someone with cystic fibrosis, and there's this green sticky mucus that's blocking the airway and obviously making it very difficult to breathe. So during meiosis, we know that chromosomes are equally divided between, so you're making the so that they are basically those two chromosomes are divided, they're replicated and divided into two cells, and then that chromosome is, again, because there's two meiotic divisions in meiosis, that double-stranded chromosome becomes two single-stranded chromosomes, and basically you have four gametes, four sex cells that are produced as a result of meiosis. So sometimes a condition known as non-disjunction happens, and it causes one less or one more chromosome to appear in one of those gametes. So there's two different types of non-disjunction that can occur. So, and it happens, it can happen during the first meiotic division, in which both of these chromosomes that are duplicated, they're supposed to, one goes to one cell and the other one is supposed to go to the other cell. That's after the first meiotic division. So in non-disjunction, both of those cells can go into, both of those chromosomes can go into one cell instead of two. And then those two will be divided, and you can have, instead of having single chromosomes, 1, 2, 3, 4 in 4 cells, you have two chromosomes in 2 of the cells. Non-disjunction can also happen during the second division, meiotic division. So this is normal disjunction. So normal, where you have two chromosomes, one goes into each of the cells, and then the second division, that this chromosome will split, and each of these cells will have one of those chromosomes, like they're single-stranded chromosomes or chromatids. And then in this case, that's second division, this chromosome didn't split equally, and the splitting happened, and both of those chromosomes entered into one cell. So this is this creates either one too few cells with one too many chromosomes, or one too few chromosomes. So what would happen if any of these gametes were fertilized with a normal gamete? You're going to have this situation. This is a normal gamete. So you can, in this situation, you've got not enough chromosomes, too many chromosomes, okay? And then you can have, this is again too few, too many, and these two are normal. So there's a number of different non-disjunction orders. Autosomal, meaning that they occur not within the sex cells, but within the somatic cells, okay, the regular cells. And one of them is called Down syndrome, which is a trisomy 21. That means it is an extra chromosome number 21. And so people with Down syndrome have that extra chromosome, and they all share very similar physical attributes. Okay, so chances of having a baby with Down syndrome increases with the mother's age. So for example, if you get pregnant over the age of 40, you have a 1 out of 40 chance of having this non-disjunction problem happening and having a child with Down syndrome. Edwards syndrome is where you have an extra chromosome number 18. Okay, it's called trisomy 18. Usually this is Edwards syndrome. It's usually fatal. There's malformations of the brain, the heart, facial, kidney, and it's a very, very short lifespan. Sexual chromosome non-disjunction order. So this is when you are either have an extra X chromosome, or you have an extra Y chromosome, or you're missing an X chromosome, or you're missing a Y chromosome. So Turner syndrome is an example. It's when a female is missing an X chromosome. Usually these females that are missing the X chromosome are short in height. They have abnormal bone development, low hairline at the back of the neck. There's the triple X chromosome. This is where the female has an extra X chromosome, very mild effects. She might be taller, have a smaller head, speech and learning difficulties, but not so extreme. And then there's Klinefelter syndrome. This is where you have, this is within a male, and the male has an extra X chromosome. So he's going to be not just XY, he's going to be XXY. And usually there's no obvious symptoms or signs of someone who has Klinefelter's. Some will have little body hair, enlarged breasts, wide hips, and testicles remain small because they've got that extra X chromosome. Then you have XYY syndrome, which is where the male has two Y chromosomes instead of just one. Usually they are much taller. They suffer severe acne during adolescence. There's an increased risk for learning or behavioral problems. So what if a male zygote was missing the X chromosome altogether? Basically, the zygote will basically not. It's an OY. It will not develop probably, and results in death. The death results because of the fact that there's too many important genes on the X chromosome, and therefore, remember the Y chromosome has compared to the X chromosome, not a lot of important genetic information. So someone without an X chromosome is unfortunately not going to make it. Oops. Okay. So that is the that is what I want. Sorry, I'm going to go over this really quickly. That is what I wanted to talk to you about today. So the most important part of this this lesson was the fact that we learned that why genetic disorders take place and how. So they can be single chain, a change to a single gene, or you can have a change in which there's an increase or a decrease in the number of chromosomes, and then there's multiple changes to one or more genes that can happen combined with environmental factors. Okay, so some genetic disorders such as cancer are caused by multiple changes to one or more genes combined with environmental factors. So in the case of cancer, the environmental factors include things like ultraviolet radiation and tobacco and cigarette smoke, radiation, those kinds of things. And I'm going to assign you some reading for this and some questions. So please go over that. And I'm also going to show you a karyotype. I'll be posting that in the lesson. So anyways, take care and take a look at what the assignment is on your Google Classroom. Have a wonderful day.